Morning. I want to talk a little bit today about more of this left-wing violence that we're seeing and all these ICE riots that have been going on. um, a lot of these people that are involved in these riots, especially with Antifa, don't necessarily hold any real strong political views. Um, they're just adolescent kids. I don't want to say adolescent because most of them are, of legal adult age, but they're just angry and looking for an excuse to lash out. And I easily could have been sucked into this had social media been a thing when I was younger. Um, I wasn't political at all when I was younger. I grew up in the, late 90s, early 2000s, skateboarder, punk rock, pretty anti government, anti system. It wasn't really until you get older and you kind of have kids and you kind of learn how society functions and stuff. But like, had these kinds of things been going on, like had I had social media and was able to get radicalized like these kids and had an excuse to go out and cause trouble and get into trouble, I would have. Now, I'm not saying all of these people at these riots don't hold strong political views. I'm not saying that everyone at these riots uh, are these lost, young men, mostly young men. There are a bunch of people there that are legit pissed off. And in fact, I got a story I'm going to talk about here. I don't want to say ICE kind of hit close to home, but it did affect somebody in my orbit, my life. And I kind of want to talk about it. So, yeah, I mean, when I was younger, in my teens, early 20s, I was just rambunctious. I was just frustrated and angry and for no real good reason. Um, I was really misunderstood as a kid, which I think a lot of my frustration came from. I've talked about this, about my issues I had with school and just authority in general. And if there was ever a time that, the National Guard or ICE or anything was marching on the streets and doing this kind of stuff, I would have 100% got out there to go, throw some rocks through some windows and get in some fights. It was just my personality, just who I was as a, young man. Um, and I worked with a lot of these people that are getting deported. I worked construction from the time I was like 16 to 20, maybe. I was in, different roles in construction, and I work with these people, and they're not all, in fact, the majority of them, they're good people and they just want a better life. And I understand that and I can respect that. However, I'm pretty black and white, I mean, they broke the law, and younger me would have been like, broke the law, they came over here. It's not like they killed somebody. It's not like they graped somebody. Sorry. YouTube TOS, I gotta say. Gotta skirt around things, Um, they just crossed this imaginary line in the sand that this imaginary line that we came up with, and now they're a criminal because they came over here uh, into our side of the on our side of the imaginary line. And I thought like that for a long time. However, the older you get, you have kids, you have your own home, you know. This is my boundary. Um, Somebody comes into my house uninvited, unwanted, um, they're not getting deported back out of the house. They're most likely going to be leaving the house a different way. Um, and it's and another thing that I learned now looking back, and I never really it didn't bother me, is working with these people that these people that came into the country illegally, and the effect it was having. Like, they were working for companies that were like, sweet, I could pay this guy a lower wage. I don't have him on payroll, so I'm not paying a payroll tax. I'm paying him cash every week. Um, he doesn't have insurance. He doesn't have all of the other expenses that come with owning a small business. Now, mind you, this is in Southern California, where owning and operating a small business is already difficult and expensive enough. On top, you know what I mean? So any way you can get around those kinds of things, the better. And they would hire these guys. They were great workers. They worked their ass off. Um, they cooked some really good food. That's the one thing I could say about the illegals on a job site, is they weren't running over to Carl's Jr. and grabbing some whatever, Carl's burgers, whatever they're called. They'd bring hot plates, and they'd be cooking fajitas and all kinds of good stuff. They always made great food on the job site. However, their paychecks always ended up back in Mexico. Everyone that I talked to, or not everyone, but the majority of the people I talked to, they would live in a house, handful of them would rent a house together. They'd all split up bills and stuff like that. But the majority of the money went back to their family in Mexico. So now that money's no longer in circulation. It's gone over the border. And when you get older and you kind of realize how that hurts an economy, how that hurts businesses and stuff, you're kind of like, yeah, we probably shouldn't be doing it this way. And on top of, nobody's learning trades anymore because we're just going to hire illegals to do it. There's the desire for, young American kids, young American boys to go out and learn a trade is being lost. So that skill set is being lost. And just it's not healthy for an economy to rely solely on people who are in the country illegally to build everything. And those are things I recognize now as an adult, and as I get older and just kind of learn more about how things operate. Now back to these riots. I easily could have been sucked into all that and just been influenced to go out and cause trouble, and thought I was fighting for a good cause, or at least fighting against the machine. And a lot of these kids, a lot of these young men, that's what they think they're doing, is they think they're fighting a good cause. They don't have really strong political views. They don't know anyone who's illegal. They never spent, a year working with, Jose on the job site. And I have. And as much as it breaks my heart that people that I would be close to would eventually get deported, because it did happen. You know, we show up to work one week and where'd blah, blah, blah go? Oh, he went back home to Mexico and they caught him at the border this time and now he's stuck in Mexico again. And we're like, fuck, sucks. Um, yeah, basically what I'm getting at is we got to figure out how to reach these kids before they get to that point of thinking this is a good idea or thinking it's acceptable or thinking that what they're doing is a noble cause, because burning down Portland and fighting with government officials is not the answer. And I mean, fortunately, if you're on the right, it is helping our side, because we can just point to all this left wing violence and see this is the stuff we're talking about, you know? Um, Now back to, I mentioned how this kind of hit home. Um, Someone on my wife's team, my wife and I both now, me now, work for his mortgage company, and my wife runs a team of people. And one of the ladies on her team, husband, is here illegally from El Salvador. I think they said El Salvador. Um, yeah, I forget. I think it was El Salvador. Anyways, um, and he got picked up. He got picked up by, I guess they're setting up these sting operations outside of job sites, and they got pulled over, and they took him. And the unfortunate part, like, so apparently he's been in this country since 2008, and they had gotten married in 2013. So he had already been here 5 years before, illegally, before they had gotten married. And now I used to think it was once you got married you could apply for a green card, and I'm sure that's how or what it was. But it's hard to feel bad for somebody who's been here for almost 20 years and really hadn't taken the steps to get this all sorted out. Especially marrying an American citizen. They have plenty of time to get this sorted out. And it hasn't been until the last couple years that apparently you can pay for a pardon for being in the country illegally. I'm not sure how the whole system works. And I know our system is screwed up. I know it takes way too long and it's way too difficult. However, we have way too many people wanting to come over to the United States, and it's just so difficult to filter through everybody. We can't just let everyone come over. And my black and white, line of thinking is he came here illegally. He's been here for almost 20 years illegally. You should have gotten this taken care of, right? Even if you went through all the proper steps, with how slow the system is, you'd already had it figured out. And it hasn't been until the last year or two that they really started making all this effort and stuff. And it sounds like he's getting deported back to his home country and has to plead to their government. Apparently they have the paperwork and they're going through all the steps and all the process and stuff over the last 2 or 3 years. But I mean, you can't just skirt the system. You can't just break laws and expect just to get away with it, And it sucks, and I feel awful for her. They have a couple of kids, they have a couple of daughters, and that's going to be so hard to explain to them that dad got shipped off to a different country because he wasn't supposed to be in this country. And it's awful. It's awful. I'm not saying I'm happy about it, but I mean, laws are laws, rules are rules. So I can understand some of these people's frustration. When you see families like that getting torn apart, for the people that are out there that aren't just rebellious young men looking for a reason or an excuse to cause trouble. The people that are out there that are legit mad, I get it. It sucks. However, um, all those things I listed off about them sending their money, I'm trying to, I recently was talking to somebody else about this, and these people come into this country illegally and they build a house in Mexico. They make good wages over here and they build a house in Mexico, and then they go down and retire in Mexico where everything's cheaper. They stockpile a bunch of money, they build a house down Mexico where it's cheap on our wages, and then they just bail. And it's a pretty common story. And I guarantee you, this person I'm talking about, they've been preparing for this. I guarantee you they were aware this was eventually going to happen, and most likely had money put aside or have, you know, I don't know, resources to deal with this. I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. My big concern is just a lot of these kids these young men that are out there causing all this trouble are just looking for a reason to cause trouble, and they don't necessarily have a political view or a strong stance on any of this. It's just violence for violence sake. And that's what's concerning and worries me, that there's so many young men out there that are that unhappy or frustrated with life that they think burning down their city or fighting with federal government is a good idea. Till next time.